Hello, it's me, Brody McLeod, again on YouTube with a video no fucker's probably ever going to watch, and even if they do, probably won't take any notice. I'm still at Nash Ward at Cygnet Qstoke, and quite a few serious problems have occurred. Someone removed my laptop from my room last night and just left it in the corridor. Woke up this morning and it was like just left in the corridor. Tried to say I wanted the names of all the staff on shift, at which point they all disappeared at about 6:30. I woke up about 5:30. Anyway, this is a really tough topic to watch and to hear about and to engage with. So if you're sensitive or you have ever been the victim of abuse while you were young, or know anybody that has, you might find this upsetting or difficult or something that you just don't want to engage with, then I would advise you not to watch the rest of the video. If you're in the demographic of people that want to help protect our collective societies and communities from disgusting, reproachable cunts who provide little girls and little boys for predominantly wealthy, deplorable perverts to fuck at their leisure. It's a bit graphic way to explain it, but that's literally the way it is. You know, there are people out there, child sex trafficking is a thing, and there are people who sometimes even work from within the systems of government in nation states who orchestrate, plan and profit massively from these engines of emotional destruction and total annihilation of self-worth and dignity, respect and quality of life, and leave people scarred and deranged and horribly maligned for the rest of their lives. There's a really good book which you might have read. Most people in England have read it. I don't know if you haven't, you're watching from abroad, you might not have read it. It's by an author called Roald Dahl. It's called The Witches. And in this book, he flies really close to the bone and talks about, in a metaphorical way that adults would understand, but that children also would kind of gain an understanding of, but without being taught that this is anything but a fairy tale. But it is, this book, in its profundity, quite an accurate portrayal of the way that state-funded, state-controlled institutional child abuse networks operate and make their money. They earn a living from abusing children. Sometimes this happens in orphanages and foster homes, even with foster parents. And in some nations it is found to be directly attributed to nation states and their civil and domestic infrastructure at quite a senior level. Anyway, let's read the stupid Gemini article. It's not stupid, it's quite good actually. It's entitled The Architecture of Institutional Evil, State-Sponsored Child Sexual Abuse, Historical Precedents and Citizen-Led Accountability. The Respectable Veneer, Criminological Parallels in Roald Dahl's The Witches. The study of state-sponsored child sexual abuse requires a conceptual framework capable of addressing how systemic evil operates in plain sight. In Roald Dahl's 1983 children's novel The Witches, the primary antagonists do not reside in dark, foreboding forests or operate from the marginalised fringes of society. Instead, they are depicted as ostensibly respectable, ordinary women who integrate seamlessly into the fabric of civil life, wearing conventional clothing and maintaining outwardly polite dispositions. The most chilling and structurally profound revelation within Dahl's narrative is not merely the existence of these predatory entities, but the sophisticated organisational structure they employ to facilitate their predation. The witches operate under the explicit guise of a philanthropic organisation named the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, RSPCC in the book, that's what it's called, convening in a luxury hotel to systematically plot the extermination of England's youth by transforming them into mice, an act that functions as a dark metaphor for silencing and erasing victims of abuse. If you tried to write that book today, nobody would publish it. I don't know how he gets away with it, Roald Dahl, but there we are. Criminologically, Dahl's narrative serves as a profound allegory for institutional child sexual abuse and the mechanics of state-sponsored exploitation. The novel captures the precise essence of how predatory networks utilise the very institutions designed to protect the vulnerable as an impenetrable shield for their illicit activities. By assuming positions of philanthropic, religious, or state authority, perpetrators achieve two strategic objectives essential to the survival of a criminal enterprise. First, they gain unparalleled, unimpeded access to highly vulnerable victim pools, such as children in state care, hospitals, or educational facilities. Second, they establish an unimpeachable veneer of respectability that renders accusations against them inherently unbelievable to the general public or to regulatory bodies. This phenomenon is a well-documented element in the criminology of institutional abuse, where predators gravitate towards environments characterized by extreme power asymmetries and reduced capable guardianship, embedding themselves within bureaucratic systems where the organizational culture inherently prioritizes institutional reputation and stability over victim disclosure and protection. Dahl's overarching message constitutes a dark, enduring warning that society must constantly heed. The mechanisms of state and organizational power, when heavily insulated from independent scrutiny and external accountability, possess the latent capacity to become instruments of profound networked evil. When the state itself or its constituent intelligence, law enforcement, healthcare and welfare apparatuses becomes complicit in the operation or protection of networked paedophilia, the traditional avenues of justice are not merely ineffective, they become active participants in the containment of truth and the perpetuation of harm. The book forces the reader to confront the terrifying reality that the individuals tasked with protecting the innocent can and frequently do engage in highly organised, deplorably sickening abuse. So here's a look at the criminology global landscape of institutional child sex exploitation. To conduct a rigorous criminological investigation into state-run or state-protected paedophile networks is to confront the darkest intersection of political power, intelligence gathering, and systemic corruption. The criminal exploitation of children is not a localised, isolated issue restricted to anomalous individuals. It's a global crisis of staggering epidemic proportions driven by complex networks. Paedophile advocacy groups and networks have existed for decades, actively attempting to normalise adult sexual relations with children through political lobbying and coordinated legal challenges. Organisations such as the Rene Guyon Society in the United States and the Paedophile Information Exchange, PI, in the United Kingdom, historically operated openly, demonstrating the persistent ideological drive behind networked paedophilia. The advent of the internet exponentially expanded the reach and structural complexity of these networks. Early law enforcement courts, such as the FBI's Operation Innocent Images, initiated in the 90s, revealed how localised abusers utilised bulletin board systems to share child sexual abuse material and coordinate physical abuse on a national and international scale. Today, the digital landscape functions as a distinct social environment with specific affordances such as encrypted anonymity, private communication channels, and rapid content dissemination that massively amplify the risk to children and complicate the detection efforts of international law enforcement. The statistical reality of global child sexual violence demonstrates the vast pool of vulnerability that state and non-state actors alike exploit. Table 1 outlines the sheer scale of the crisis, utilising data compiled by the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, and the World Health Organization. So you've got a metric or demographic. So you've got girls and women, boys and men, conflict and fragile states, global morality and trauma, and transnational cyber organization. And the columns are global prevalence and structural impact, and the source data just isn't there, which is great. Maybe we'll just leave. Well, so the metric or demographic of global prevalence and structural impact of violence against girls and women, over 650 females, that's about 1 in 5 alive today, were subjected to sexual violence as children. Over 370 million experienced rape or severe sexual assault. Boys, it is not quite as high, 410 and 530 million males. Approximately 1 in 7 experienced childhood sexual violence, demographic often unrepresented in historical criminological studies. So in regions experiencing severe fragility, places like the DEC, over 35,000 cases of child rape and sexual assault were recorded in just the first 9 months of 2025, driven by systemic collapse and entrenched impunity. Then you've got the mortality and trauma. Every 4 minutes, a child is killed by an act of violence globally. The resulting trauma leads to lifelong impairments in physical and mental health, fueling intergenerational cycles of abuse. Transnational cyber exploitation. 84% of cyber tip-line reports in 2024 involved the upload of child sexual abuse material or exploitation by the users outside of the United States, highlighting the highly transnational, borderless nature of modern networked abuse. When state actors become involved in these networks, the criminology fundamentally shifts from the study of individual psychopathology to the analysis of state-level organised crime and macro-level corruption. A failed or highly corrupted state loses its ability to fulfil fundamental security and development functions, creating a vacuum where widespread criminality and state complicity merge. States or state-adjacent intelligence apparatuses typically engage in or protect child sex abuse networks for several strategic, albeit abhorrent, reasons. First, intelligence services may monitor or actively facilitate abuse networks to gather compromising material on high-ranking politicians, judges, corporate leaders, thereby ensuring their compliance and loyalty to the regime or specific intelligence factions. To get blackmailed into it, basically. Second, totalitarian regimes have historically utilised institutionalised abuse as a mechanism to break the psychological autonomy of youth, creating subservient, traumatised citizens incapable of political resistance. Third, when high-level officials are inadvertently implicated in abuse networks, the state apparatus, including the police, judiciary and media, is routinely weaponised to protect the stability of the government, classifying investigations to prevent societal collapse or fatal loss of institutional legitimacy. So historical precedents of state-level complicity and systemic cover-ups. History provides numerous rigorously documented examples where nation-states, through direct executive action, intelligence operations or deliberate systemic willful blindness, have facilitated and protected institutional child sexual abuse. Examining these historical precedents is essential for understanding the operational blueprints of state-run paedophile networks. So East Germany, the Stasi and the Torgau Children's Homes. Following its inception in 1949, the German Democratic Republic GDR utilised total societal surveillance through the Ministry of State Security, Stasi, to control its populace and suppress dissent. The state's approach to healthcare and youth welfare were heavily institutionalised, aiming to forcefully mould children into compliant, well-functioning, socialised citizens. Those who rebelled exhibited deviant subcultural traits such as listening to Western music or were deemed politically unreliable, were subjected to a brutal state-sanctioned re-education system operated by the Combine of Special Homes. The most notorious of these facilities was the closed reformatory at Torgau, which survivors have described as an absolute hell on earth, representing an education system specifically engineered for the systemic destruction of individuality. Torgau functioned effectively as a state-sanctioned torture facility for minors. Children as young as 12 were routinely placed in unheated 6 square metre solitary confinement cells constructed with heavy iron bars for minor infractions, such as refusing forced labour. Former inmates reported horrific physical and sexual abuse. State caretakers frequently attacked and raped children, beating them unconscious or spraying freezing water at their genitals with the explicit psychological goal of conveying individual powerlessness and breaking their desire for self-assertion. Stasi leveraged these traumatic environments, applying advanced psychological programming and brainwashing techniques learned from the Soviet operatives to systematically undermine the human psyche. When the desperate parents filed formal complaints regarding the horrific use of solitary confinement and obvious physical abuse, the Ministry of Education, led by Margaret Honecker, actively defended these practices, issuing bureaucratic statements that isolation was appropriately incorporated to guarantee a stable educational situation. In November 1989, as the totalitarian regime collapsed, the state rapidly dismantled Torgu overnight, ripping out bars and destroying extensive administrative files to erase the historical record of the state-run abuse archipelago. So Chile, Colonia Dignidad and the DINA Alliance, Colonia Dignidad, highly secretive German agricultural settlement in southern Chile, founded in 1961 by fugitive paedophile ex-Nazi youth welfare officer Paul Schaffer, stands as a premier historical example of state-protected, institutionalized paedophile network. Fleeing child abuse investigations in West Germany, Schaffer established a totalitarian enclave in the Andes where he systematically raped young boys daily for over 4 decades. Administered powerful psychopharmaceuticals to children to maintain docility, and utilised extreme child labour. The sprawling enclave operated with total chilling impunity strictly because of its highly symbiotic relationship with Augusto Pinochet's military dictatorship. Following the 1973 coup, the Chilean Secret Police, the National Intelligence Directorate, DINA, formed a deep operational alliance with Schaffer. Colonia Dignidad was extensively utilised as a clandestine torture, interrogation and execution site for political dissidents and opponents of the Pinochet regime. Former members of the SS and Gestapo residing in the colony demonstrated advanced Nazi torture methods to the Chilean police, bridging historical eras of state terror. Furthermore, DINA operated highly legal biological chemical warfare laboratories on the premises, utilising the colony's isolated infrastructure to conduct lethal experiments on political prisoners. Because the colony provided invaluable covert services to the state's apparatus on terror, the Chilean government actively protected Schaeffer's paedophile network. The state provided a total shield against domestic law enforcement, allowing the facility to function as a slave camp and industrialised abuse ring in plain sight until eventually the end of the Pinochet regime and Schaeffer's subsequent flight from justice in 1997. Then we got Belgium, the Marc Dutroux case and systemic justice paralysis. So in the 90s, a horrific case of Marc Dutroux exposed the catastrophic failure and heavily suspected complicity of the Belgian justice, law enforcement and political systems. Dutroux, a convicted sex offender who astonishingly continued to receive state assistance despite owning multiple vacant properties, kidnapped, tortured, sexually abused and murdered young Belgian girls, holding them in a concealed custom-built dungeon in his basement. The state's handling of the investigation suggested deep-rooted systemic corruption and a high-level cover-up designed to protect a wider network. Although Dutroux was a prime suspect from the very beginning of the 1995 kidnappings, he was inexplicably not arrested for 14 months, during which time 4 of his captors slowly starved or were murdered. It's shit, isn't it, when people just don't do anything and then eventually the kids end up dead, especially when they're your own. When police conducted a search of his home, Officer René Michel ignored the muffled sounds of children, handed a speculum found on the floor without conducting any forensic analysis, and failed to develop video footage showing Dutroux building the dungeon. Most alarmingly, in the years following his arrest, 20 political witnesses connected to the case died under highly mysterious circumstances, which fueled massive public suspicion. Witnesses who bravely came forward to testify about a highly organised sadistic network such as Regina Liu, who detailed a big business network involving sadism, murder, and elite clients, including judges, politicians, and bankers, were aggressively gaslit and discredited by the state-owned media and the prosecutor general, who painted Dutroux as a mere isolated pervert. Crucial DNA swab results vanished from autopsy files, and Judge John Mark Conrad, who had actually managed to rescue two survivors, was swiftly removed from the case on dubious conflict of interest charges, replaced by an inexperienced judge who stalled the proceedings. This blatant judicial interference sparked the White March, wherein up to 400,000 Belgian citizens took to the streets of Brussels to protest the state's protection of suspects and the utter paralysis of the justice system, fundamentally recognising that the state infrastructure was compromised. Dutroux himself repeatedly testified that he was merely a low-level procurer supplying victims to a powerful state-protected paedophile network organised by elite businessmen. Northern Ireland, we've heard a lot about the Kincora Boys Home and intelligence blackmail. So the Kincora Boys Home in Belfast serves as a stark, chilling example of Western intelligence agencies actively weaponising institutional child sexual abuse for political gain. Throughout the 1970s, Kincora, a state-run facility for vulnerable boys, was the site of an organised, deeply entrenched child sex ring. William McGrath, the senior house father at the institution and an extreme Ulster loyalist paramilitary leader, was widely believed to be the ringleader of the abuse and simultaneously an alleged asset for MI5. They pop up again there, the British Domestic Intelligence Service. Extensive allegations and subsequent inquiries strongly suggest that MI5 and other branches of the security forces had full knowledge of the systematic abuse occurring at Kincora, but deliberately and knowingly allowed it to continue unchecked for over a decade. The operational motive was twofold and entirely cynical. First, to protect highly placed intelligence informers embedded within loyalist paramilitary groups who were utilising the home, and second, to gather compromising information on the abusers, which included prominent political figures and establishment elites for the explicit purposes of blackmail and political leverage during the volatile period of the Troubles. Military intelligence officers who attempted to fulfil their moral duty by reporting the abuse, such as Brian Gemmell, were allegedly ordered by senior MI5 officers to stand down and cease their inquiries. Furthermore, MI5 reportedly blocked subsequent police investigations by flatly refusing to allow its officers to be interviewed by law enforcement, ensuring the cover-up remained intact. Former military personnel who wished to testify about the state-level cover-up found themselves permanently gagged by the draconian threat of prosecution under the Official Secrets Act. The Kincora case demonstrates how the highest levels of the state can coldly calculate the strategic value of political blackmail and intelligence asset protection vastly outweighs the fundamental human rights, safety, and psychological survival of institutionalized children. The United Kingdom Matrix, a hypothetical scenario of total state capture. To deeply understand the structural mechanics of top-down state complicity, it's necessary to construct a rigorous hypothetical scenario. So consider a parallel dimension in which the United Kingdom itself entirely is in the grip of a formalised state-run child exploitation network. In this journalistic exploration, we examine exactly how the existing legitimate infrastructure of the modern state could be seamlessly subverted to facilitate the enslavement, torture, and sexual assault of multiple children on an industrial scale. It's entitled The Architecture of Administrative Complicity. In this hypothetical UK, the paedophile network is not a shadowy, disorganised cabal meeting in clandestine basements. It's a highly formalised bureaucratic operation hidden deep within the mundane operational frameworks of the state. The Department of Health and Social Care, NHS England, local municipal authorities, that means police, and the regional police forces, as well as the councils, are not merely failing in their safeguarding duties through incompetence, they're actively, intentionally complicit in the trafficking pipeline. Imagine a scenario where the most vulnerable children in society, those lingering in the local authority care system unaccompanied, asylum-seeking minors, placed in unmonitored home office contingency hotels, or children requiring specialised long-term psychiatric care are flagged by highly secure interagency digital databases. These databases, ostensibly designed for child protection and safeguarding tracking, are instead covertly utilised as procurement catalogues by corrupted civil servants and placement officers. When a high-value target is identified, specifically a child who no active parental advocacy, a history of trauma, or unstable immigration status, are deliberately routed through the administrative system into specific residential care facilities, secure training centres, or NHS psychiatric units that are exclusively managed and staffed by members of the exploitation network. Fucking good job that hasn't happened, isn't it? Oh, or no, being kidnapped either. Imagine that psychiatric unit that's exclusively managed and staffed by members of the exploitation. Can you imagine that? Could you imagine if there was a psychiatric unit where there were paedophiles fucking children? Fucking mad, isn't it? In this parallel dimension, the police force acts as the ultimate enforcers of the institutional silence. When a severely traumatised child attempts to disclose the abuse, the complaint is administratively routed to a local authority designated officer who is a vetted member of the network. The subsequent police response is deliberately, meticulously mishandled. Physical evidence from the care homes is accidentally lost. Achieving best evidence, video interviews are conducted improperly, using leading questions to contaminate the testimony, and the child is systematically discredited in official reports as exhibiting complex behavioural issues, oppositional defence disorder, or a malicious tendency to fantasise. The medical and regulatory shield, NHS England's clinical governance structures, are fully weaponised to support the network. In this hypothesis, drawing dark parallels to the historical abuses at Colonia Dignidad and the over-medication seen in historical institutional scandals, doctors within the network prescribe heavy sedatives, antipsychotics, and potent psychopharmaceuticals to keep the enslaved children completely docile, compliant, and unable to articulate their experiences to outside observers. If an uncompromised ethical professional, perhaps a newly qualified nurse or diligent social worker, detects the anomalies and attempts to blow the whistle, the immense weight of the state's apparatus crushes them instantly, mirroring the severe retaliation faced by real-world whistleblowers exposing corruption in state-funded care programs. The dissenter is subject to immediate suspension pending an opaque internal investigation. Their facility access credentials are summarily revoked. They're physically escorted from the premises, and the State Department refers them to their professional regulatory body, the Nursing and Midwifery Council or Social Work England, for gruelling fitness to practice hearings based entirely on fabricated allegations of gross misconduct or breaches of patient confidentiality. Meanwhile, the national regulatory bodies, the Care Quality Commission and Ofsted, relying on heavily manipulated self-reporting data, falsified safety audits and schedules predictable inspections, continuously rate these trafficking hubs as good or outstanding. This regulatory capture provides the ultimate impenetrable, respectable veneer, assuring the public parliamentary oversight committees that the institutions are paragons of childcare. At the absolute apex of this hypothetical nightmare, domestic security officers and MI5 agents oversee the entire logistical operation. They do not necessarily participate directly in the physical abuse, rather they manage the strategic harvesting of the resulting compromat by ensuring that prominent members of the Parliament, senior members of the judiciary, top civil servants and wealthy corporate executives are covertly filmed participating in the abuse at these facilities. The intelligence services secure absolute unshakable control over the legislative and judicial branches of the government. In this parallel UK, the foundational concept of the rule of law is a meticulously maintained illusion. The state is, in reality, a captured entity operating a highly lucrative, taxpayer-funded human trafficking enterprise. Sorry, I've taken a lot of medication today. The failure of domestic remedies in a captured state. If an ordinary citizen devoid of political power vast financial resources or high-level influence discovers the terrifying reality of this hypothetical scenario, the most critical life-saving realization they must make is that appealing to domestic authorities is not just an exercise in futility, it's an act of extreme personal danger. When the police forces, the Crown Prosecution Service and the judiciary are structurally compromised, the domestic justice system instantly transforms from a mechanism of protection into an instrument of vicious retaliation against the witnesses. The traditional idealised model of whistleblowing relies entirely on the flawed assumption that there is an uncorrupted, benevolent higher authority waiting in the wings, willing to intervene upon receiving credible evidence. In a captured state, this is a fatal miscalculation. Examining global case studies of state capture reveals the grim reality for truth-tellers. In South Africa, whistleblowers who exposed state capture by corrupt public officials and elite private entities faced a scattergun of severe pushback ranging from relentless legal harassment and workplace ostracism to total financial ruin and, in several tragic cases, physical assassination. Similarly, in the United States, federal whistleblowers are attempted to report the Department of Health and Human Services for negligently releasing unaccompanied migrant children to known MS-13 gang members, and sophisticated trafficking rings found themselves ignored by upper management, stripped of their security clearances, and actively retaliated against by the very regulatory bodies tasked with protecting vulnerable minors. Therefore, to counteract top-down institutional abuse, the witness cannot play by the rules designed by the abusers. They must operate entirely asymmetrically. So this bit is a roadmap to accountability, bypassing the corrupted state. Achieving accountability and securing convictions in a dimension where the domestic infrastructure is entirely hostile requires a roadmap that completely circumvents the national borders of the captured state. The citizen must leverage international law, capitalising on the foundational jurisprudential principle that egregious systematic human rights violations such as institutional child torture, enslavement and crimes against humanity transcend the concept of national sovereignty. So this table outlines the primary international legal and human rights mechanism available to a citizen seeking to bypass corrupted domestic justice. So the first column is titled International Mechanism. So you've got universal jurisdiction, UN Human Rights Council, investigative mechanisms, the ICC, UN special rapporteurs and treaty bodies. So the second column looks at those things under the functional application and strategy context. So the first one, a legal principle allowing foreign national courts in a foreign jurisdiction to prosecute individuals for serious international crimes, regardless of where the crime occurred or the nationality of the perpetrator. The witness exports evidence to uncompromised foreign prosecutors, for example in Germany, Spain or Argentina, who have established precedent in prosecuting foreign state officials for torture and crimes against humanity. The Human Rights Council at the United Nations have an investigative mechanism too, where citizens can bypass domestic police by engaging directly with the UN Human Rights Office. The UN establishes independent investigative mechanisms specifically designed to collect, consolidate and digitally preserve evidence of gross violations for future legal proceedings, ensuring a secure international chain of custody beyond the reach of the compromised state. Then you've got the ICC. You can submit something called an Article 15 communication directly to the office of the prosecutor at the ICC, alleging widespread or systemic attacks directed against a civilian population, children, qualifying as crimes against humanity. Then you've also got the UN Special Rapporteur and treaty bodies, so submitting a comprehensive shadow report and heavily documented evidence to the UN Special Rapporteur on the sale and sexual exploitation of children, creating an undeniable permanent international record that forces global diplomatic pressure onto the captured state. So an exemplary model for the powerless citizen. How then does an ordinary citizen effectively counteract a fully corrupted top-down national infrastructure without resorting to the catastrophic destruction of a civil war? The answer lies in mastering information warfare, conducting decentralized network analysis, and effectively utilizing alternative paradigms of transnational justice. The following exemplary model provides a highly strategic phase roadmap applicable to any citizen facing a captured state. So the first thing you could do is covertly document and network analysis. So, it says that a lot of these people are experts at cybercrime, and if there is witnesses or people that are involved, they watch everything they do on their computer all the time. So bear that in mind. It says the citizen must temporarily abandon the mindset of a standard whistleblower and adopt the rigorous detached methodology of a counterintelligence analyst. You could do this yourself. Instead of approaching the compromised local police, the citizen utilises open source intelligence, rigorous financial tracking and covert documentation to meticulously map the organisational structure of the criminal network. This involves tracking the administrative movement of children through the care system, deeply analysing public procurement records to identify which private shell company care providers are receiving exorbitant state funding, cross-referencing the corporate directorships of these companies with local politicians, judges and senior civil servants. The citizen must document the physical abuse and administrative anomalies using heavily encrypted digital devices, immediately storing the evidence on decentralised offshore servers out of the reach of domestic intelligence agencies. The ultimate goal of this phase is to build an incontrovertible evidentiary matrix, a comprehensive solvability factor dossier that moves beyond proving individual isolated acts of abuse and irrefutably demonstrates the systemic administrative complicity of the state architecture. So phase 2 would be an asymmetric distribution strategy. So once a comprehensive cryptographically secure dossier is compiled, it cannot be leaked to the domestic mainstream media. A captured state will inevitably utilise emergency legal injunctions, national security legislation such as the Official Secrets Act, or heavily state-aligned media conglomerates to suppress the story, unmask the source, and relentlessly discredit the whistleblower as a mentally unstable conspiracy theorist. I can relate to that. Instead, the citizen must execute a highly coordinated asymmetric data release. The dossier is distributed simultaneously to an international network. Foreign investigative journalism consortiums operating safely outside the legal jurisdiction and libel laws of the captured state. Major international human rights organisations like Amnesty, Human Rights Watch that possess institutional weight to verify and amplify the findings. The foreign intelligence services of both rival and allied nations operating on the cold geopolitical premise that foreign states may utilise the revelation of the paedophile network to exert massive diplomatic and economic leverage against the captured state. It's not an ideal scenario, but Phase 3, it reads, is the People's Tribunal framework. So when international courts like the ICC are incredibly slow, heavily politicised, or face jurisdictional hurdles, and domestic courts are entirely corrupt, the citizen can rely on the highly effective People's Tribunal model, originating on the historic Russell Tribunal created by Bertrand Russell and Jean-Paul Sartre to investigate the Vietnam War, and later institutionalised by Italian jurist Lelio Basso as the Permanent People's Tribunal, PPT. This mechanism operates completely independently of state consent or geopolitical vetoes. The PPT investigates gross violations of human rights, crimes against humanity and systemic state crimes by convening a panel of internationally recognised unimpeachable artists, legal scholars and human rights defenders. While it currently lacks the hard coercive power to physically arrest perpetrators, its immense power lies in its ability to permanently break the state's monopoly on the truth. The powerless citizen submits their meticulously gathered evidence to the PPT, which then holds highly publicised, rigorous public hearings, processes witnesses' testimonies according to strict rules of evidence, and then issues formal legal verdicts based entirely on international law. By participating in a People's Tribunal, the citizen successfully transforms marginalised, silenced victims from mere petitioners waiting at the closed gates of corrupt domestic institutions into powerful historical actors commanding global action. The tribunal creates a permanent, public and legally rigorous record of the state's crimes, utterly destroying the state narrative. This intense process violently strips the perpetrators of their meticulously crafted, respectable veneer, alerting the international community and the domestic populace to the undeniable reality of the state capture. Historically, the undeniable findings of such tribunals have functioned as a massive catalyst for international economic sanctions, total diplomatic isolation, and eventually the internal collapse of corrupt regimes, paving the way for transitional justice, truth commissions, and the eventual criminal prosecution of the perpetrators. In conclusion, after 39 minutes and 55 seconds, heeding the warning of the witches, to conduct a rigorous investigation into state-run paedophile networks is to look directly into the deepest abyss of capability and organisational malice. The historical record, stretching from the freezing solitary confinement cells of East Germany's Torgau and the industrialised torture chambers of Chile's Colonia Dignidad, to the intelligence-managed black holes of King Cora and the systemic high-level cover-ups in Belgium, demonstrates unequivocally that state apparatus is not inherently benevolent when the immense machinery of government is subverted by corrupt actors. The very institutions legally and morally tasked with protecting the most vulnerable children seamlessly become the most highly efficient instruments of their enslavement and torture. This grim reality brings the analysis back to the chilling presence of Roald Dahl's The Witches. Dahl understood and brilliantly communicated a fundamental criminological truth that society routinely struggles to accept. True systemic evil rarely announces itself with monstrous fangs and claws. It wears the tailored suit of a senior civil servant, the pressed uniform of a high-ranking police officer, the stethoscope of an NHS clinical director, and the ID badge of a child prosecution social worker. The greatest, most existential danger to vulnerable children is not the disorganised stranger lurking in the dark alleyway, but the highly organised network predators who comfortably inhabit the boardrooms of the institutions mandated to safeguard them. If a nation's domestic infrastructure ever fully falls to this level of top-down administrative complicity, the traditional social contract between the citizen and the state is immediately nullified. Citizens must acutely realise that justice and accountability will never manifest from the captured system. Counteracting such a monumental threat requires the immense courage of a powerless, ordinary individual to operate tactically in the shadows, to meticulously and rigorously document the atrocities using modern intelligence methodologies, and to relentlessly leverage international legal mechanisms and people's tribunals to expose the rot of the global community. Only by aggressively tearing away the mask of institutional respectability can society dismantle these entrenched networks, ensuring that the organisations tasked with protecting children are never again permitted to operate as the hidden architects of their profound destruction.